Welcome to Opportunity in Public Infrastructure, which is our fourth panel for the first Iowa Ideas In-Depth Week of 2022. I'm Marissa Payne, the Gazette Cedar Rapids government reporter, and I'll be your moderator. Today we'll be talking about how community projects and public infrastructure projects can change the trajectory of a local community, from economic opportunity to improving the daily quality of life for residents. As our communities emerge from the pandemic, we'll discuss opportunities available for major game-changing investment, and how we can leverage that for growth locally. So please feel free at any point, those of you in the audience throughout the session, to send questions, and I'll work those into the conversation where I can. So before we start, I'll hand it over to our panelists to briefly introduce themselves. I'll start with Josh.
Well, thanks. My name is Josh Schamberger, and I am president of Think Iowa City, which is also known as the Iowa City Coralville Area Convention and Visitors Bureau. I've been here for just short of about 21 years. And prior to that, I spent just over 4 years at the Bureau in Cedar Rapids. We are the official destination marketing organization for the Iowa City Coralville area. And through that work, we're pretty intimately involved in quality of life and community betterment efforts, whether that be the development of the downtown SMID many years ago, or Iowa City's Riverfront Crossings District, Coralville's Iowa River Landing, or North Liberty Centennial Park. So all of these efforts have a pretty direct correlation to community and economic development and the work that we do. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Brenda.
Hello, my name is Brenda Mainwaring. I'm the president and CEO of the Iowa West Foundation. We are a place-based foundation in Pottawatomie County, Council Bluffs, but we serve 14 counties in Southwest Iowa. Our funding source is the Iowa West Racing Association, which is the nonprofit license holder for Ameristar, Harrah's, and Horseshoe Casinos in Council Bluffs. So we've been in existence for about 25 years, and throughout that 25 years, have distributed in excess of $500 million. All of which was matched for the most part. So that's about $1 billion worth of new projects, large infrastructure projects, all the way down to small group support throughout Southwest Iowa. Prior to getting here at Iowa West Foundation in September of 2020, I spent 23 years at Union Pacific doing primarily community work. And so focused a lot on doing infrastructure and transportation projects for communities.
Thank you. And Jeff.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Jeff Pomeranz. I'm city manager, City of Cedar Rapids, Iowa's second largest city. And I've been in the state for a number of years, starting my career in West Des Moines, Iowa in 1998, and left in 98, came to Cedar Rapids in 2010, and it was a very, very positive move for me. Throughout my career, I've been very much involved in really all phases of city government, of course, but having a real interest in economic development and recognizing the critical importance of infrastructure as you improve an economy, such as a city economy. So I am a city manager that really gets a great satisfaction and energy from helping to build and improve a community and a region. And infrastructure is key to that improvement that we all want to see. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's dive right into things. Historically, what have been some of the challenges communities faced to pursue major community and infrastructure projects? And as well, what have been some of the opportunities unique to Iowa and to your communities?
Are you going to call on us or just jump in?
Whoever would like to start first.
I would. It's pretty easy in Council Bluffs, and Jeff will agree with me on this one. Flooding has been a consistent challenge throughout Iowa, but Council Bluffs in particular, some of the major projects we've worked on with the riverfront development, the flooding has really caused us a lot of constraints, not only from the standpoint of being able to build something, but being able to get cooperation from the Army Corps of Engineers. We occupy a floodplain bounded by the state line in the form of the Missouri River, and then of course the Loess Hills. And so expansion is a bit of a challenge for our part of the state, and particularly when we're looking at infrastructure like sewer and water. And then the other challenge that may be somewhat unique to us is that when we do have a particular success, it often tends to flow into our neighboring Omaha. The Mid-America Center, for example, started out very strong, and then Omaha venues were quickly built, and most of the business that had been going on at the Mid-America Center flowed over there. So those are challenges that are a little bit unique to our part of the state when we think about infrastructure.
Yeah, so as a city manager, as I said, infrastructure is absolutely critical to economic development. I think all communities want to improve the quality of life, and they all want to create jobs. And yet, if you don't have the proper infrastructure, you're not going to be able to achieve that level of success. Much of the challenge in infrastructure has to do with time, and sometimes it takes a long time to develop significant infrastructure improvements, but also dollars is obvious. If you're a community and you receive a visit from a company that wants to create 1,000 jobs, but by the way, there needs to be a significant enhancement or improvement, so to say your water system or your wastewater system, not having that immediately could be a true limiting factor. So the dollars need to be invested early. The dollars need to be invested with the long-term view, so that when that opportunity comes about, you are ready. A couple, a big example of that, and Josh is a member for a number of years of our airport commission in Cedar Rapids. So the city of Cedar Rapids, when we look at CID, it's not a city of Cedar Rapids entity exclusively. It's a regional entity, and yet, those decisions and those investments were made a long time ago by some very, very forward-thinking individuals. I don't think that it would be a surprise to those individuals if they saw that growth and development today, but it is truly a regional, statewide success story that took a lot of early planning, early investment by the citizens of Cedar Rapids, as well as those that supported the airports. That's a great example of how, maybe you're a little bit early, but being early is actually a positive when it comes to infrastructure. And then you need to be willing and able to make those significant investments so you're ready when those opportunities come about. I can go on and on, but I don't want to take Josh and Brenda's time.
No, you keep going, Jeff.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I could talk forever about the Eastern Iowa Airport. Jeff knows that. I mean,
Yeah,
it's the most important and most valued asset we have in this part of the state. There's no question, and I couldn't be more proud of the leadership that's happened there. So, I'm a little different than Jeff and Brenda in the world that I operate in. So, as it relates to challenges that we face to pursue community projects, Jeff certainly recognized the number one on my list, which is certainly money. But he also referenced, and I agree, it's the time it takes to kind of stay the course and move these to completion. Projects like Coralville's Iowa River Landing took decades to develop. And through that, all sorts of obstacles arise. Natural disasters, we certainly had our flooding, but also like leadership attrition. Over time, you have new councils, new city managers. I think I've been here, and I'm pretty sure the last count we had, I'm on the 5th University of Iowa president from the time I've been here. So, that sort of different leadership has different goals and priorities. And, I knew this was a Gazette panel, and this isn't to kind of call attention to the challenges they've been facing, the media, but I think another significant challenge is the complete sort of dramatic deterioration of local media. organizations in the world that I live in, and part of this, organizations like Gazette and Press Citizen and television and radio, there used to be a time when these sort of large scale community development efforts were aided by the kind of detail of local coverage. And when I say aided, I completely mean community involvement and participation. And it's gotten a lot harder, much harder in the past decade, when more and more of our sort of neighbors and residents only focus their control or their attention on their specific chosen Twitter or Facebook subject area or their political bent, as opposed to the larger community development and the issues at hand.
Absolutely.
And some of those things really muddy development.
Yeah, I think there's real risk taking that's sometimes necessary in order to move these infrastructure and community development, economic development projects forward. And, it is so important that public officials as well as nonprofit are able to communicate the benefits of these projects and then really bring the public along in many cases. Or the alternative is you get a lot of opposition and bad feelings towards what you're trying to accomplish. And so I'll just give an example of that. Just way back in my career in 1985, when I was city manager for the first time in Del Rio, Texas. And we had, this is before social media, more or less, Marissa. There were some forms of it, but they were more underground, you might say. So the paper in the community was the main source of communication. And so we needed to build this international bridge between our city and Mexico, and the mayor and council pushed it heavily. But a couple of citizens, for their reasons, as well as I believe, the constant need for us as government to communicate properly, they actually ended up recalling the mayor of the city because they disagreed with the approach, with the goal of this particular project, which was this bridge over the Rio Grande. And so sometimes you can really pay a heavy price. So communities really, it's just so critical and incumbent on us to properly communicate, listen to, explain, and get the community largely on the side of the project and on the side of government. But that is a real challenge, and it's much more challenging in today's times because of the way that the public communicates in many different ways.
So Marissa, you may plan to ask more than one question, but let me just weigh in on this again.
Great question.
All those comments about the community and how elected officials face huge pressures, whatever side they're on, they face huge pressures. One of the concepts of philanthropy is that we serve as a research and development arm of local communities, local governments, essentially because we can take on the risk. We can participate at the front end of a concept. We can fund it with some seed money without putting taxpayer dollars at risk. And so one of the best aspects of a public-private partnership is the ability to let the funders be present in the best place where they can make the biggest contribution. And at the front end, that's where philanthropy can be of the most value, because people don't have the opposition to spending private dollars to figure out whether a bridge or a park or some sort of new amenity might work in the community. And once you can prove that and develop a marketing campaign for it, then you can hand it off to the public entity where there are much larger buckets of funds to actually make that infrastructure happen.
Yeah, and that's actually a great segue into the next question here, which would be, whether this is before COVID or right now, what are some ways that you've all seen, different partners and funding sources come together to help communities jumpstart, game-changing projects?
You want to just call on us, or you want? I'm glad to chime in, but I don't
go
want
first
to
every time.
edge in on everybody else's time here.
You go first. You lead. Buddy.
Okay. Well, I think that partnerships are absolutely critical, and when I think about the people on our panel today, I've known Brenda for a long time, and I'll say one of the reasons I know Brenda, beyond being a fantastic person, is we've asked Union Pacific for dollars for projects for a number of years and have had to, appear before Union Pacific team to talk about our projects. And, I've also had the opportunity to know Josh for a long time, and we have helped each other in many, many ways that I think the public would be surprised about. And a great example is Josh's tenure on our airport commission. But partners are absolutely vital. And so I have the greatest of respect for our federal partners as well as our nonprofit partners and our state partners. And I'll give one example. After the flood of '08, I was serving as city manager of Cedar Rapids at that time. And I received a phone call from then Governor Culver, who said he wanted me to serve as chair of this new entity he was establishing called iJobs. And the iJobs was a creation of the state government. It was modeled after a number of programs that were put together by President Obama at the federal level. But the idea of iJobs was for the state as a partner to step forward and place almost $200 million of state monies in a fund, the iJobs Fund, to assist flood impacted communities. And so I was extremely pleased when the governor asked me to chair that board. And we had a number of individuals from around the state of Iowa on the iJobs board. But, the fun part and the great responsibility was, here's $200 million. Now develop a program, develop a process to distribute those monies across the state of Iowa to flood impacted communities. So I could go into all the projects in Cedar Rapids that were funded by iJobs monies. And again, that was before I actually came to Cedar Rapids, but was very, very well aware of what had happened here. But there was all kinds of dollars across the state, again, to flood impacted communities. So that's just one example. But we're in a constant opportunity zone right now because of not just state dollars, but federal dollars that are going to be coming our way through ARPA and other funding sources as a way of dealing with the impacts of the pandemic. So I think that is going to be and will be and is a great opportunity. And then as far as our partners at the nonprofit level, I mentioned Brenda and the efforts they have put into building communities that they have a presence in. But we are constantly working with foundations and other nonprofits that have dollars that want to invest in Cedar Rapids. And often that seed money, as Brenda said, whether it's to do a study or whether it's to gain some initial support, is absolutely vital to them bringing other people, other companies, other levels of government along. And we find that when we eventually apply for dollars through the federal government or the state government or some other entity, there's often that question, who else is supporting this effort? Is in our case, for instance, in Cedar Rapids, Hall Perrine Foundation is just a major supporter of what we accomplish, but there's many, many others like the Greater Cedar Rapids Foundation or individual foundations. So it really is important that we have that support. Sometimes it's fantastic when it comes early, but sometimes the private nonprofit support are the last dollars in, and same thing with the state. So we need that impact. We need those dollars. And luckily at this time, we have a lot of entities that are very willing to at least talk about and at some level support the efforts of our government in Cedar Rapids.
And then I have to add a plug there for the Connect CR project to revitalize Cedar Lake, because I see Council Member Dale Todd on the call, major champion of that effort.
Yeah.
So
he's not just a champion; he's the father of Cedar Lake. So I'm teasing, but yes, I mean, in addition to getting that support from the nonprofit sector, from other levels of government and public sector, you need often that champion, that individual. This is way before Dale, Councilmember Todd, was a council member, although he's had long affiliation with the city, but he had this dream, he had this vision of a greater, a better, a more beautiful Cedar Lake and trail system and bridge system in Cedar Rapids. And it took one person to really get the ball moving and, you know, cause that spark that created this really exciting opportunity. So
I want to just build on that for a minute. I think when you look around at communities that have been particularly successful, what you see is a very strong level of collaboration and commitment to a singular project. You know, you really have to have balanced commitment. We, Iowa West Foundation, may have what we think is a terrific idea, but if it doesn't meet with the city and the county's goals, we're just going to throw money into it and nothing's going to happen. If the city and county have some concept that doesn't fit with our mission, we're not going to be able to help. So there has to be collaboration, and it has to be really early. One of the challenges is that political entities use a different calendar than businesses and foundations do. They just operate at a different time level. I also think that there's a high level of sensitivity of sharing information with other people when it's still just the germ of the idea, because for elected officials especially, there's so much risk that if it gets out early, it will be killed by opponents before you really get to flesh out the idea. But I would say to whoever's listening on this, generally speaking, private entities, whether they be foundations or businesses, can be trusted with private confidential information. You need to go to them very early so that they can understand what you as an entity, as a community, have in mind and what their role might be, and they may make the idea better. A perfect example here in Council Bluffs is the First Avenue Railroad Corridor. It was originally dedicated as a railroad corridor, but it was a city street. It became unused by the railroad. 15 years ago, one mayor ago and two CEOs for Iowa West ago, the organizations came together and started talking about the need for the community to build that. Iowa West started acquiring, holding property that would contribute to that more than a decade ago, ultimately donated it to the city. Finally, a couple of years ago, the city was able to acquire the property, has now started construction. We've donated about half of the funds for the construction. And now in the next year or two, we're talking about how can we as an entity support the activation of that corridor by building some of the amenities, by getting some entertainment activities going on there. So for 15 years or more, the two entities have worked together, sometimes quietly, sometimes publicly, to talk about what this First Avenue rail corridor will be in the community. And from start to finish, it's been a great collaboration, all pointed towards the same goal.
I don't know that I'd have a lot to add on what Jeff and Brenda said, but certainly I would start by giving my own shout out to Dale Todd. I mean, that guy's a legend up there. And, you know, back when it was a commission form of government, he was the man as the Parks Commissioner. So I valued my time working with him, and he still every now and then pops in Johnson County and says, hey, so
he's still the man.
He's the man. Thank you, Dale Todd. You know, I think as it relates to this, you know, you know, people like to say kind of post-COVID that collaboration is the new currency or whatever in many ways. But, you know, in so many ways, I got to give a tip to the leadership around here. And that's been the operating manner here for kind of decades, as evidenced by Jeff and Mayor Corbett calling me many, many years ago and saying, hey, we need to, this Eastern Iowa, Cedar Rapids Airport needs to represent Eastern Iowa, and asking me to be that Johnson County guy. And their leadership and kind of vision have made, you know, that continue to be successful, and now it's handed off to others and truly regional. So, but in our particular community, which is very not heavy private sector, you don't count on one hand the number of large private sector companies in our community. It's this sort of collaboration has been out of necessity. And I think it's directly attributed to the growth. We've had to work together in order to move these projects forward from a town gown sort of thing. So, you know, in the projects that I've personally been intimately involved in, you know, limited experience compared to folks like Jeff and Brenda, but I haven't seen much of a change in some of the funding sources. You know, the state continues to have good economic development programs that support some of these efforts. I certainly personally believe that there could be probably some more opportunities developed through the state's portion of ARPA and some of those things. But by and large, their programs have very much contributed to the public infrastructure growth and quality of life stuff that's occurred here in the corridor. Programs like the Iowa Reinvestment District and Enhance Iowa and CAT. And then other things, we just had to be creative and work collaboratively. Things like new market tax credits. Those sort of things have been really, really key to making a lot of our efforts a reality. So I'm sorry I don't have much more on that.
No, I think those are some really good points, Josh and Brenda. But when you list those programs, what is very, very evident in today's times, projects are very, very expensive. And maybe that's obvious, but even as we're getting out of the pandemic and we're seeing rising costs, these different layers of programs are absolutely vital. So the city can have lots of ideas, the community can have lots of ideas, but in order to be successful, you need lots of people with you. So I'll give you an example. Near our library in downtown Cedar Rapids, we have a development that we've been working on for 15 years or so. We call the area the Banjo Block, but it's a new multi-story residential property. Without the efforts and the programs and the initiatives of the federal government, of the state government, of the city government, working with the developers, these projects, this one in particular, I wouldn't have happened. And we have many, many projects like that. And that's not specific to Cedar Rapids. Those partnerships, those collaborations of funding sources are just vital today in order to pull off a number of projects that we have on the books. And I think we're going to see that more and more as costs continue to go up. It's obvious that raw material costs continue to be a challenge. And so if you're building a building that has lots of steel in it, your costs are going to go up significantly. So do we stop everything? Do we give a new level of assistance at the local level, or do we also look towards our partners at the different levels of government, the state and the federal? I think we're going to all have to really amp up the collaborative efforts. Josh mentioned the airport, and we're also proud of that because it is one of the most successful regional activities that I've been involved in my career. And we just received from the state government, as Josh knows, a very substantial grant to complete work at our airport at CID. And that's really, really important to us. And we were able to leverage those dollars based on the work that had already been done and all the planning through many, many years to receive the support of Governor Reynolds and the state of Iowa to supplement what had already been invested upon at the airport. And that, we're all very proud of that airport, and those dollars will be very, very evident when you utilize CID.
Yeah, and I think since we touched a little on the role of state support in, getting some of these projects going, I think Josh, a great example for you to further discuss would be, the Extreme Arena, Iowa River Landing, and, the role that development plays in kind of having a destination attraction down in your area.
Yeah, well, certainly it's significant. It's been a long time in the works. I think the earliest reference to this sort of Iowa River Landing area was in the early 90s, and the council, had the long-term vision and the staying power. And I think it was aided very much by a strong city manager who had, been through the course, had things change, as I mentioned earlier, with leadership attrition and things like that. Who knows whether or not it would have materialized, but that whole area has become a destination in and of itself, including this sort of final anchor, which is this small Extreme Arena and Green State Family Fieldhouse. And, it's adding significantly in terms of community and economic development. I will tell you that one thing you will never want to do is open an arena in the middle of a pandemic, particularly when every sort of funding an aid package was tied to previous year's returns and results, and there were none because the venue wasn't open. So, nobody predicted COVID, of course, so it kind of is what it is. They're getting through that, and the team there has done a good job, all things considered. But, we have a tremendous amount of events that have come to this community and quite honestly, the state. Just one example, this December, if you go on the UWW's website, which is the governing body for the sport of wrestling, you'll see about 50 events with a nation's flag next to it. And there's only one that has an American flag, and it's going to be right here in Iowa this December. And so that would not come here without a facility like that, and certainly without a connection to the Hawks. So it's been pretty important. There's no doubt. And sorry for my cold and this constant nasal Hall's relief medicine I'm in. Trying not to call from you.
Yes, I can just supplement what Josh has said. These facilities are important to our communities. So in the case of Cedar Rapids, we have our arena and our convention center and hotel. That arena received support from the federal, state governments, particularly after, this occurred after the flood of 2008. But if you look at the convention center, at the time, we received a almost $50 million injection of funds from the federal government. That was an Economic Development Administration grant. And at that time, that was the largest EDA grant that had ever been given to a community. And then in addition to those federal dollars, we had state iJobs monies that assisted us, as well as very significant support from the Hall Perrine Foundation. So I think that facility was in place for a long period of time. As far as the arena, we really didn't have any convention facilities, but without the citizens of Cedar Rapids and the bonding that we did for those facilities, and then the state government and the federal government and the nonprofit sector, those were absolutely critical to us developing and moving forward on our initiatives. COVID was tough on our facilities, but we're also seeing a real comeback after COVID and lots of new and refreshed interest in those facilities. So we're feeling good about where we are, and having a number of venues in our area, I really think makes us all stronger, because there's just a lot more to see, to do, to be entertained, to be a destination of our entire area. So I think we are working together, and we couldn't do it without the support of the other layers of government and the nonprofit sector.
I certainly would not diminish in any way the impacts that COVID had on a variety of entities, but I'm going to take a slightly different perspective on it. I think that one of the things that COVID did, if we find the silver lining, is it forced us to just stop, pause, and look around and see what was working and what was not working, to see how our residents were using the resources that were available to them, to see if we were meeting those needs in the way that they wanted to use the resources. And that has been that's allowed us to better identify the needs. Some of those are social service needs. In Council Bluffs, we identified that we were relying almost solely on church-based food services, pantry services. Well, almost all of those church-based pantry services were run by elderly volunteers who stopped coming in when COVID hit. And so the pantry system shut down. We had to look at it differently. But then if you look at things like recreation, county parks, and I'm sure this was across the state for all of the recreation facilities across the state, they were overwhelmed with residents trying to get out and get a breath of fresh air and maybe see somebody from a distance without wearing a mask. So it really gave us a reason to pause, to identify what the priorities were, and then maybe to use some of the new federal funding to address some of those priorities.
Yeah, Josh or Jeff,
Yeah.
do either of you have examples of, ways that the pandemic has forced you to rethink, how business is done and, leverage that to pursue some of these larger projects?
Well, first of all, it's forced us to look at efficiency. And so there's absolutely no way you can say, at least in Cedar Rapids, that the pandemic didn't affect the city of Cedar Rapids. And, you look at our hotel, for instance, the DoubleTree, or if you look at our convention facilities, for a period of time, no one was traveling. I mean, that's not a slight on Cedar Rapids or any other place, but if you own a convention center and business is frozen, then you're going to feel the impacts of that. So in our case, we were very, very lucky to have a private sector manager of those facilities. And so the first thing they did was look at efficiency and how do we cut back? How do we make changes so that we can continue to minimize the impact of COVID. So we were able to do that, and now we're coming back, and others are, I think, ready to start traveling again and getting back to normal. And that's certainly our hope, and we're seeing that as evidenced by business at our facilities. So I think that's been important. I think COVID itself, again, we looked at our organization internally, and when things first occurred, we looked also organizationally, where could we be more efficient? Do we need to fill this position? Do we need to continue that program? And so we had addressed a number of opportunities and made changes so that we were positioned to come out of COVID better and stronger. And I think from an overall city organization, with the support of our mayor and our city council and our city team, we were able to make some tough choices, but we have a balanced budget. We have significant reserves. We're in very, very strong shape. And so I think that COVID did help us focus our eye on efficiency, again, with the idea that we're going to come out of this and we're going to come out, hopefully, and in this case, we are stronger than before. I think COVID also gave us the opportunity to sit down and really look at our goals and look at the direction of our community and see where we needed help and where we needed to place emphasis. So an example of that would be housing. So we know that housing is a significant challenge across the country, and I'm really focused on lower cost housing. During and after COVID, we've been looking at that, talking about that as we had before, but really now putting some action into place and supporting to a greater degree programs and opportunities that bring new and exciting housing opportunities to those of a lower income. And so that's an example, but we have lots of other examples of where COVID forced us to set goals, set direction, look towards the future in a more effective and efficient way, and then be ready when that opportunity comes and we get back to normal. And we're there now. We're feeling good. We're feeling strong. We've got the dollars in place to really make those investments in the future of our city, and we have the goals and we have the direction in order to accomplish that.
And I don't know, Marissa, that I'd have a lot to add. And completely dramatic is kind of an understatement as it relates to hotels and visitation and conferences and meetings, business travel. These things add substantially to the local economy, north of 400 million a year for just Johnson County. So, we're starting to see just now a little bit of light at the end of the kind of 2-year tunnel as it relates to business travel and meetings and things like that. Sports certainly come back a little bit sooner. Some of the entertainment came back sooner, but it certainly had a ripple impact. And particularly for our community, which is very transient based, education and healthcare, and so there's certainly been projects that have had to been set to idle or maybe even permanently set aside as a result of COVID impact. But to Jeff's point, it required us to look at ourselves and be more efficient. We started to play roles that the community needed us in those times, whether it be through COVID or the racial, inequality issues that arose through the George Floyd murder. There were things that the community needed us and hats they needed us to wear at these different moments. And we ably stepped up, and I'm proud of our team for doing that. But our role at the end of the day is one of economic development, and we had to be prepared and be efficient to bring the business back as soon as we did see that light at the end of the tunnel. So like Jeff's team, and they had a great big announcement yesterday with a huge piece of business that's going to come here this summer with a pilot group. We're looking forward and feel pretty confident about the days ahead.
And I know we only have a little over 15 minutes left, so feel free, people, to continue to submit questions, and I'll continue to work some of those into our conversation. We have one here from the man himself, Dale Todd. I don't think anyone's ever gotten more shout outs in the middle of an Iowa Ideas panel than Dale Todd. But his question is, one of the important drivers for change in places like Council Bluffs and Dubuque was early gaming revenue. That was the early money in that allowed governments to take on the risk with large infrastructure destination projects. Places like Coralville had to levy bonding capacity, and Cedar Rapids has not been able to access gaming funding. Do you see that as an inequity?
I'm going to guess that's directed at me. At least I'll take this first swipe at that. So Iowa is completely unique. It is the only state in the country that ties gaming revenue to charitable donations. In order to operate a gaming entity of any sort, whether it's a church bingo or it's Caesar's casino, it has to be tied to a nonprofit entity. And those funds that come from the casino revenue, a portion goes to the sponsoring license holder, such as the Iowa West Racing Association. And the man, Dale, is completely correct that when it first started out, there was a lot of tension about the fact that Pottawatomie County, for example, was getting this gaming revenue and could focus on Pottawatomie County. A lot has changed in statute since then. A lot has changed in practice since then. We just last fall did a little mini internal study, let's call it non-scientific, to talk to the other QSOs about how they distribute their resources. All 99 counties benefit from the QSOs. I'm not going to pretend that Pottawatomie doesn't receive more than Harrison and our surrounding counties, but we do in fact serve 14 counties. And if you are a county adjacent to a casino, you are almost certainly getting some of those funds. In addition to that, in 2004, I think the state said, we got to look at those non-casino counties as well. They also need to participate in some of these revenues. And so those non-casino counties receive specific community endowment dollars that are allocated to the 84 counties that don't have casinos. So there's a lot of funding that's available through gaming resources. They, with the exception of Cedar Rapids, and that's obviously in play right now, and Iowa City and Ames, which are unique, every other major metropolitan area in Iowa does have a casino. So it's the sense that the casino dollars or the gaming revenue is going to unfairly to those counties is not necessarily true, because it tends to go towards the major metropolitan areas, with the exceptions I just listed. So it's an interesting challenge, but I would say for anybody who's on the phone who is interested in using some of those gaming revenues, the gaming revenues that are distributed on an annual basis, anywhere from $80 to $100 million every year, $80 to $100 million across the state. And there are opportunities to get creative, to go to my colleagues across the state to see what we can do to help with some of the infrastructure.
Well, I think that those that are knowledgeable across the state know that Cedar Rapids does have a great desire to have a casino in our community. And when I say Cedar Rapids, I mean the citizens of Cedar Rapids that voted in favor of gaming, and certainly our city council and county board of supervisors have supported gaming as well on several occasions, not just recently. And we have every hope that we'll be able to submit a formal application to the State Iowa Racing and Gaming Commission. We will work hard to show that the future casino in Cedar Rapids, if we're given permission, will be a very, very exciting venue, one that will bring a whole new kind of potentially retail around it, entertainment, gaming certainly, in Cedar Rapids that will be of benefit to the state of Iowa, just as the other casinos have been of benefit. We are working with a company that has their goal of being extremely supportive and generous to the nonprofits. They've already announced that support. The company that we are working with on what we hope will be the future casino in Cedar Rapids has been very supportive of city government and of county government in Lynn County. And they are, again, just excited about the opportunity to show our future plans, to let everyone in the state know that this is going to be really a special casino with really a multifaceted kind of entertainment for Lynn County residents, but for the entire state, and one that gives back generously, as I said, to the city government and to the nonprofit sector. So there's going to be a strong case put forward by the city of Cedar Rapids through the applicant. And we look forward to being able to appear before the commission and talk about exactly what we have in store as far as this new casino, if it's approved for the citizens of Iowa beyond, and in particular Lynn County. So more to come on that. And yes, I believe that when Brenda, says we're an exception, we don't want to be an exception anymore for gaming. And so we want to, take that word away and just be treated fairly and be given the opportunity like others have had in the state of Iowa.
Yes, as you and our mayor always say, the time is now.
The time is, are you saying that, Marissa, or are we saying
Oh,
that?
no, I'm just
I didn't think
quoting
so.
what you said.
Okay, thank you for reminding me. It is the right time for us. Before you get to Josh, were you going to ask about the derecho at all? Because that's something that we're also dealing with in Cedar Rapids that I really haven't talked about. But maybe that's your next question, or no?
Well, I have
It's
an
up to you.
audience question that I'd like
Okay.
to work in. And
Okay.
this one would be great for Josh to weigh in on first. To
Okay.
what extent
Sure.
are Iowa's state universities faculty involved in and contributing to your major projects?
Yeah, well, they're very involved, particularly in our community. In just about every initiative we develop or we take under here that at least I'm involved in, we take advantage and leverage the expertise that we have at the University of Iowa. We've gone so far as to do small little economic-based survey analysis projects with graduate students, programs at School of Urban and Regional Planning, Sports Studies, Sciences, had their participation. And most recently, the COVID situation required us to, when we go back to efficiency, we aligned our communications and marketing partners team here with our peer economic development organizations and moved forward with an initiative called Project Better Together, which really kind of streamlined communications and resources to the community. We've kind of parlayed that into another initiative called Better Together 2030. And before we even kicked that off and really kind of identified what we want this particular community to look like by 2030, we got the sign off and got President Wilson involved, recognizing how critical they are to community development. So she's one of the 3 chairs of that initiative. And, as she brings up in just about every one of our subcommittee meetings, the university goes as the community goes, and vice versa. The community goes certainly as the university goes. They are, in a lot of ways, our Mount Rainier. If you look at the way Tacoma does economic development, things like that. So very, very involved and appreciative. And, that's still just the way it is here. Like I said earlier, we don't have a big private sector. I mean, our employers are the hospital and the university, and then a handful of others in Johns County area. And I don't have a lot to weigh in on the casino either. I mean, that's just not an area of my expertise. I feel for Jeff and Cedar Rapids for the real hoops they've had to jump through up there. But a university will never, at least in my mind, it's my own personal opinion, will never be located right here next to the University of Iowa and the student base. It's just not going to work. So, but anything Dale Todd's behind, I'm behind.
Well, that's probably a good philosophy. So maybe you should be a city manager also, Josh. Agreeing with your counsel is often a good thing. I did want to mention, that the whole university system is something Josh is, that's in his area of domain. We're obviously very, very strong supporters of the University of Iowa in a number of different ways, and very proud of our relationship with them as well as Iowa State. So from an infrastructure economic development perspective, I just wanted to briefly mention we have been working with Iowa State for a number of years, and in fact, we're partially funding a faculty member at Iowa State that's related to our ag economy. So yesterday was the celebration of agriculture in Cedar Rapids at the Doubletree, and there's a lot of interest at that agricultural level to look at how are we using the byproducts of the agricultural industry. And so we have been working with Iowa State, and we've had some good success with a professor who's looking specifically at how do you create new products with the byproducts of the ag industry and create more opportunity and more jobs off of those particular byproducts. So that's one example of how we're, in a small way, working with, in this case, Iowa State, and creating new products and ideas, largely from the agricultural industry.
Yeah, and I know we have just about 5 minutes here, so we'll begin to wrap up. Jeff, perhaps you can, fold in some derecho takeaways in your response, since you want to discuss that. But, basically, as we wrap up, I'd say, what are your takeaways, whether the folks listening are in smaller rural communities or some of Iowa's larger cities, for, how to make the most of their unique assets and the challenges that they face to leverage, long-term growth.
Yeah, I will start because I think I won't take very long, but we serve a lot of rural communities, 14 counties. We do a lot of rural communities. As a specific example, a few months ago, the county came to us and said, look, there's a lot of ARPA money available for these rural communities, but they have no capacity either to identify the projects or to submit what is a hugely complicated federal application, or to do that whole process. So in collaboration with the county, we were able to, and this is where we're sort of the R&D, we were able to leverage some of the existing county resources to go out to the communities and talk to them about what are your priorities. We funded an experienced consultant who can go and identify what might be ARPA qualified and then help them write those applications. So it comes back down to talking about what's possible. Even in rural communities, it's not a matter of approaching it by yourself. It comes back to the collaboration being pointed towards a single issue. Jeff mentioned the rural agriculture. There are housing shortages everywhere across the state of Iowa. rural communities need to focus on housing as much as urban communities. Talking to your urban partners and coming up with some sort of collaboration and regional approach is almost certainly going to be more productive in getting funding and getting infrastructure built than trying to go it alone.
I'll jump in, and I didn't quite hear the full question because there was a question that came in. I was reading, so I'm sorry, Marissa, but I think I got it as it relates to, how do we make most of our unique assets for long-term growth, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, that it holds true. It just really comes down to good visioning and a master planning process. And for that to be representative of, sort of true and authentic inclusivity, and to have it be authentic to community assets. We can brag here in Johnson County about a predicted 13, 14% growth in the next 5-7 years. But recognizing where that growth is coming from and who represents that growth, and then improving and developing quality of life, around that growth is very important. And in my mind, kind of the key to smart growth and success, and having a strong kind of 2030. So I don't really have a lot more than, that inclusivity is certainly representative of community and residents, but also the core private sector. Again, or in our case, the University of Iowa. So, we very much ebb and flow with one of the state's greatest assets. And so it's in a lot of ways the promise behind our brand here. And so we're going to continue to do everything we can to support President Wilson and the entire University of Iowa and the team at UIHC.
Right. What I would say, just as we're wrapping up, it's been a tough couple of years. There's been the pandemic that everyone has gone through in our nation and in the world, and those impacts are real. As we've talked about, we have confidence that we're coming out of that, hopefully stronger than before. I certainly believe the city, from a financial position and from an overall organizational perspective, will come out stronger and better than before. We have had the opportunity, the devastation of our country after George Floyd and what happened there, but also the opportunity again to be better and to be stronger than before. And we could do a whole other session on what we're doing to be better and stronger when it comes to working with our entire community in a diverse and equitable and inclusive fashion. The derecho for the city of Cedar Rapids was really a tough time. It was unique in that when we had the flood of 2008 and we had the flood of 2016, and we've had other disasters that have occurred, there may have been a part of the community that was impacted. In the case of the derecho, the entire community was impacted. And we lost practically 750,000 trees. We've never had oceans. We have a river that we're proud of as part of our community and our culture. But we were always so proud of our tree canopy. And we have trees left, but that's been devastating for us. But again, we look to our partners for assistance, and the city council and our mayor supported our Relief Cedar Rapids program at $1 million. There it is. Thank you, Marissa. At $1 million a year, we're looking to the private sector, the nonprofit sector. We've received a lot of support, and we're going to need more support to really put this $30 million effort to relieve Cedar Rapids over the long term in place. But as we've done that, we put a plan together, which Marissa held up, the relief plan, that is something no other entity, no other city, county, government, community has taken on a replanting effort of this magnitude anywhere. So you've had hurricanes and you've had tornadoes across our country, and you've had fires, but no one has said, we're gonna try to replant over a 10-year period close to 1 million trees. And it's not just the city; it's our community, it's our citizens. You think about our parks and the devastation that occurred there. So a lot has gone on. We've had a lot of impact on our community, some of it not positive, but what I'm proud of, and I'm hearing from Brenda, nonprofit sector, and Josh, everything that's going on in Iowa City and Coralville and beyond, that we're coming out of this. And in many ways, we've learned a lot. We've worked on developing collaboration and partnerships, and we are going all to be better and stronger. But it takes time for a tree to grow, and it takes time to get out of the pandemic. But I have every confidence and every good feeling that we have the ability, the knowledge, the background, the relationships to be better and stronger in the future.
Yeah, well, thank you. What a good note to end on. Yeah, thank you for all those of you watching, and especially to our panelists for participating. As I mentioned earlier, this is the first Iowa Ideas in-Depth Week of the year, but we will have 2 more this year, one in May with a focus on human and social services, and one in July with a focus on healthcare. You should have access to the full week of sessions at iowaideas.com, and you can also register there for our conference October 13th and 14th. Tomorrow at noon, wrapping up this week, is strategy across geographic boundaries. This final panel will take a look at the elements and coordination involved in building a strategic plan for regional economic success. So thank you all and have a good rest of your days.
Thank you
You
very
too.
much.
Thank you.
Pleasure's great participating with all of you. Thank you.
Thanks so
Marissa.
much. Good to see you, Jeff.
Good seeing you. See you again soon.